The sun hung low over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, Tennessee, casting a golden glow across the town's bustling farmers' market. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh strawberries, warm bread, and the faint hum of live music from a local band. Stalls lined the cobblestone square, their colorful awnings fluttering in the gentle breeze. Families laughed, vendors called out their wares, and children darted between the crowds, clutching dripping ice cream cones. Amid this vibrant chaos, a woman stood quietly at the edge of the market, her presence almost unnoticeable to the untrained eye. Her name was Lena Harper, a 38-year-old black woman with a commanding yet understated grace. She wore a simple sundress, the hem swaying just above her knees, and carried a woven tote bag slung over one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing sharp, thoughtful eyes that scanned the scene before her. Lena wasn't here to shop, she was waiting. She had agreed to meet her younger sister, Tasha, who had insisted on dragging her out of her office for some much-needed fresh air. As a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on Goliath-sized cases, Lena rarely had time for moments like this. Her life was a whirlwind of depositions, late-night research, and courtroom battles, but today, she'd relented. She leaned against a lamppost, pulling her phone from her bag to check the time. Tasha was late, again. Lena sighed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She was about to text her sister when the sharp whine of a siren cut through the market's cheerful din. Heads turned, conversations paused, and the music faltered as a police SUV rolled into the square, its tires crunching against the cobblestones. Two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp and their postures rigid. The taller one, Officer Greg Tatum, adjusted his cap, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the crowd. His partner, Officer Dale Morrow, rested a hand on his holster, his expression unreadable. The market resumed its rhythm, albeit with a wary edge, as people assumed the officers were there for a routine patrol. But Lena felt a prickle of unease. She'd spent enough years studying patterns of behavior, both in courtrooms and on the streets, to recognize when something was off. The officers didn't move toward the vendors or the bandstand. Instead, their gazes locked onto her. "Ma'am," Tatum called, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "We need to speak with you." Lena straightened, her calm exterior unshaken. "Me?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. She slipped her phone back into her bag, crossing her arms casually. "What's this about?" Morrow stepped closer, his boots thudding against the stone. "We received a report of suspicious behavior in the area. You fit the description." The words hung heavy in the air, and a few nearby shoppers slowed their steps, casting curious glances. Lena tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "Suspicious behavior? I've been standing here for 10 minutes, waiting for my sister. Could you be more specific?" Tatum's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't need to explain ourselves. Can we see some ID?" The request wasn't a question, it was a demand, laced with an authority that brooked no argument. Lena's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She'd faced worse than this: hostile witnesses, biased juries, even threats slipped under her office door. This was just another test of her resolve. "I'd like to know what I'm being accused of first," she said evenly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who knew her rights. Morrow's eyes narrowed. "It's a simple request, ma'am. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The crowd was growing now, a loose semicircle of onlookers forming around them. A teenage girl with braids pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. An older man muttered something to his wife, shaking his head. Lena felt the weight of their stares, but she didn't falter. "I'm not making it hard," she replied. "I'm asking for clarity. That's my right." Tatum took a step forward, his hand brushing his cuffs. "We're not here to debate. ID, now." Lena exhaled slowly, weighing her options. She could comply and de-escalate, or she could stand her ground and risk whatever came next. She chose the former, not out of fear, but strategy. Reaching into her bag, she retrieved her wallet and handed over her driver's license. Tatum snatched it, holding it up as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. Lena Harper, he read aloud, his tone dripping with skepticism. What's your business here, Ms. Harper? I'm waiting for my sister, she said, her voice steady. I live 3 blocks away. This is my town. Morrow smirked, handing the ID back. Sure it is. You alone? For now, Lena replied, slipping the card into her wallet. Am I free to go? The officers exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Tatum's jaw tightened. Not yet. We're still sorting this out. Sorting what out? Lena pressed, her patience thinning. You haven't told me what I've done. Step over here, Morrow said, gesturing toward the SUV. We need to ask you some questions. The shift in tone was unmistakable. What had started as a vague inquiry was spiraling into something more deliberate. Lena's mind raced, cataloging every detail, their badge numbers, their posture, the growing crowd. She knew this playbook, escalation masked as procedure. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why, she said, planting her feet. Tatum's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. You're resisting, he snapped, though Lena hadn't moved an inch beyond standing still. What? She exclaimed, her voice rising for the first time. I'm not resisting anything. The teenage girl hit record. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a chorus of disbelief. Let her go, someone shouted. Morrow stepped in, yanking Lena's other arm and twisting it behind her back. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around her wrists, and a jolt of pain shot up her arms. This is ridiculous, Lena said, her voice tight with anger. You're making a mistake. Tell it to the judge, Tatum muttered, shoving her toward the SUV. As they forced her into the back seat, Lena caught the girl's eye through the window. The phone was still rolling, capturing every second. Don't stop, Lena mouthed, her resolve hardening even as the door slammed shut. The ride to the station was a blur of flashing lights and static-filled radio chatter. Lena's wrists ached, the cuffs too tight, but her mind was already shifting gears. She'd been here before, not as a detainee, but as an advocate for those who had. She knew the system's cracks, its biases, its blind spots. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a challenge. At the station, the process was mechanical and dehumanizing. Fingerprints, mugshots, a holding cell with peeling paint and a flickering bulb. Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, Morrow said smugly as he locked the door. Enjoy your weekend. Lena sat on the bench, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't cry or curse. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to plan. They thought they'd silenced her, humiliated her. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Hours later, Tasha arrived to bail her out, her face a mask of fury and worry. Lena, what the hell happened? She demanded as they stepped into the night air. They picked the wrong fight, Lena said, her voice low and resolute. And I'm going to finish it. The days following Lena's arrest were a storm of quiet fury and relentless action. She returned to her modest apartment on the edge of Willow Creek, a space cluttered with law books, case files, and a single potted plant she somehow kept alive. The arrest replayed in her mind like a looped reel, the officers' sneers, the cuffs, the crowd's gasps. But Lena didn't dwell on the humiliation. She channeled it. Her first call was to her law partner, Marcus Reed, a wiry man with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. I'm suing them, she told him over the phone, her voice steady as she paced her living room. Tatum, Morrow, and the department. False arrest, racial profiling, excessive force, the works. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'm in. This is bigger than just you, Lena. We can make it a class action if we dig deep enough. Good, she said. Because I'm not stopping at an apology. Next, she reached out to the teenage girl from the market. Her name was Kiera, a high school junior with a fearless streak. The video Kiera had recorded was already circulating online, racking up thousands of views. You're a hero, Kiera told her during their call, her voice trembling with admiration. I just wanted to help. You did, Lena replied. That footage is evidence. Keep it safe. The community response was swift and electric. Willow Creek wasn't a big town, but it had a heartbeat, a network of activists, church groups, and everyday folks who'd long whispered about the police department's heavy hand. Lena's arrest lit a match under them. Protests sprang up outside the station, signs reading, "Justice for Lena," and "End the abuse." Strangers left voicemails at her office, sharing their own stories of harassment. A local pastor invited her to speak at Sunday service. Lena declined the spotlight but met with organizers in private, listening, strategizing, building. Her nights were sleepless, spent hunched over her dining table with legal pads and a laptop glowing in the dark. She drafted motions, reviewed statutes, and cross-referenced case law until her eyes burned. Marcus joined her most evenings, takeout containers piling up as they dissected every angle. They'll claim you provoked them, he warned one night, tapping a pen against his coffee mug. That's their go-to. Let them try, Lena said, her gaze fixed on her notes. The video shows I didn't move a muscle until they grabbed me. The lawsuit took shape, a meticulous, airtight beast designed to expose not just Tatum and Morrow, but the systemic rot they thrived in. Lena knew the odds. Civil rights cases were uphill battles, especially in a town like Willow Creek, where old loyalties ran deep. But she'd beaten worse odds before. At 25, she'd won her first major case, securing a settlement for a family wrongfully evicted by a predatory landlord. At 32, she'd taken down a corrupt city councilman. This was personal now, but it was also her calling. The pressure mounted as the story spread beyond Willow Creek. A Nashville news station picked it up, then a national blog. Reporters camped outside her office, shouting questions she ignored. "Ms. Harper, are you seeking revenge?" one yelled as she pushed through the throng. She didn't answer. Revenge wasn't the goal, justice was. One evening, Tasha showed up with a bottle of wine and a stern look. "You're running yourself into the ground," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep when it's over," Lena replied, taking a sip. "This isn't just about me, Tash. It's about everyone they've hurt." Tasha softened, her eyes glistening. "I know. I just hate seeing you carry it all." "I'm not alone," Lena said, nodding toward the window where protest chants echoed faintly. "They're with me." Weeks later, the first court date loomed. Lena stood before her mirror, adjusting her blazer. The suit was her armor, the courtroom her battlefield. She wasn't the plaintiff today, she'd handed that role to Marcus to avoid bias, but she'd be there, watching, guiding. The defendant's attorney filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the officers acted within protocol. Lena smiled grimly as she read the filing. They had no idea what was coming. But then, a curveball landed. Marcus called her late one night, his voice tight. "Lena, you won't believe this. You've been tapped to judge a case next month, internal misconduct hearing. Guess who's on the docket?" Her heart skipped. "Tatum and Morrow?" "Yep. Excessive force complaint from last year. Unrelated to you, but the timing? Cosmic." Lena sat back, the irony washing over her. She'd spent weeks preparing to dismantle them as a litigant. Now, she'd face them from the bench. It wasn't just a twist, it was a reckoning. The Willow Creek courthouse was a squat, brick building with creaky floors and a perpetually broken air conditioner. On the morning of the misconduct hearing, it buzzed with an unusual energy. Word had spread, Lena Harper, the woman Tatum and Morrow had arrested, was now Judge Harper, presiding over their fate. The gallery filled with locals, activists, and a few reporters scribbling notes. The air crackled with anticipation. Lena entered through the judge's chambers, her robe settling over her shoulders like a mantle. She'd spent the night reviewing the case file, an incident from 8 months prior, when Tatum and Morrow had allegedly beaten a young mechanic, Jamal Carter, during a traffic stop. The evidence was damning: witness statements, a fractured rib, a dashcam video with suspiciously muted audio. Lena had recused herself from her own lawsuit to avoid conflict, but this case was separate, and the judicial rotation had landed it in her lap. She couldn't recuse herself without cause, and she wouldn't. This was her duty. She stepped onto the bench, her expression serene but unyielding. The room hushed as she took her seat, her gavel resting beside her. Tatum and Morrow sat at the defense table, their uniforms starched but their faces pale. Tatum's eyes widened briefly before he looked away. Morrow gripped the table's edge, his knuckles white. They hadn't expected this, not her, not here. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. The room obeyed. The Honorable Lena Harper presiding. "Be seated," Lena said, her voice clear and steady. She glanced at the attorneys, then the defendants. "This court is now in session. We're here to address allegations of misconduct against officers Gregory Tatum and Dale Morrow. Let's proceed." The prosecutor, a young woman named Priya Patel, opened with a methodical breakdown of the incident. Jamal, a 23-year-old father, had been pulled over for a broken taillight. Within minutes, he was on the ground, battered and pleading. "This wasn't de-escalation, Your Honor," Priya said, her voice rising. "It was domination." Lena listened, her pen moving across her notepad. She'd seen cases like this too often: power wielded like a club, consequences shrugged off. The defense attorney, a slick veteran named Paul Grayson, countered with a familiar script: Jamal had resisted, the officers had followed training, the injuries were exaggerated. Lena's gaze flickered to Tatum and Morrow. They avoided her eyes. When Jamal took the stand, the room tensed. He was slight, with a nervous energy, but his voice held firm. "I didn't fight back," he said, his hands trembling. "I asked why they stopped me, and they lost it." "Did you resist?" Priya asked. "No, ma'am. I was scared stiff." Grayson's cross-examination was aggressive, probing for inconsistencies. Jamal didn't waver. Lena watched, her face impassive, but inside, she felt the echo of her own arrest, the same excuses, the same playbook. During a recess, she overheard Tatum muttering to Morrow in the hall. "This is a setup. She's out to get us." "It's not a setup," Grayson snapped. "It's a coincidence. Keep it together." Back in session, Lena maintained her impartiality, ruling on objections with precision. But her presence alone was a pressure cooker. Tatum fidgeted, Morrow sweated through his collar. They knew who she was, not just a judge, but a witness to their tactics. As the day ended, Lena adjourned with a strike of her gavel. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." Court dismissed. She lingered at the bench, organizing her notes. Tatum and Morrow hesitated by the door, their shoulders slumped. They didn't approach her, but their unease was palpable. Lena met their gaze briefly, her eyes a silent challenge. This wasn't over. The final day dawned gray and heavy, rain streaking the courthouse windows. The gallery was packed, standing room only. Lena took the bench with the same quiet authority, her robe a shield against the storm brewing outside, and within. Today, she'd render her decision. Priya's closing was fierce. "These officers abused their power, Your Honor. Jamal Carter's story isn't unique, it's a pattern. Accountability starts here." Grayson's rebuttal was desperate. My clients acted under pressure, within their rights. This is a witch hunt. Lena let the words settle, her gaze sweeping the room. She thought of Jamal, of Kiara's video, of every voice she'd heard since her arrest. Then she spoke. This court has reviewed the evidence, testimony, footage, medical reports. The defendant's actions on November 14, 2024, were not a lapse but a violation. I find officers Tatum and Morrow guilty of misconduct. They are suspended without pay for 6 months, pending further review by the department. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Tatum's head dropped, Morrow stared ahead, stunned. Lena continued, this isn't about retribution. It's about responsibility. The badge demands trust, and you broke it. She struck her gavel. Court adjourned. The room erupted, cheers, whispers, a few angry shouts. Lena stepped down, her heart steady. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sun broke through. Kiara waited by the steps, grinning. You did it. We did it, Lena corrected. This is just the start. Later, her lawsuit settled, policy changes, training reforms, a public apology. Tatum and Morrow resigned quietly. Lena returned to her work, not as a victim, but a victor. The woman they'd underestimated had turned their story into a legacy of justice.